Minister says the debates will go on through the night if necessary to get the scheme passed. Jacqueline McKenzie, head of immigration and asylum law at Lee Day Solicitors, told LBC there could still be legal challenges.
It is possible a very, very small number of very destitute people may end up going. The British government may well have to bring them back after legal challenges. But I think the thing here is to be seen to have a plane take off into the skies.
A parliamentary researcher is one of two men charged with spying for China. They allegedly supplied information which could be useful to an enemy. Donald Trump claims his hush money trial in New York is a case that nobody wanted to bring. He's accused of falsifying business records to pay an adult film star, something he denies. Train drivers at 16 rail companies will stage strikes next month in their long-running pay dispute. Members of the ASLEF union will walk out from the 7th until the 9th of May. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed at 128 points at 80.23, a new record high. The pound buys $1.23 and €1.16.
LBC Weather.
With Ripple Energy. Climate action you can be proud of.
Light rain continuing in central and eastern England tonight. Dry elsewhere. Cold in the north with a low of 1 degree. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Very good evening to you. It's 8:02 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. Welcome to Monday's Cross Question. With me on the panel are Munira Wilson, Liberal Democrat MP for Twickenham and the party's education spokesperson, Dr. Rakib Ehsan, who is a social policy analyst. That's a very grand title, I think.
It's very grand, isn't it?
It confers great intellectual ability to you, but we'll be the judge of that over the next hour.
You will indeed.
He's the author of the book Beyond Grievance, What the Left Gets Wrong About Ethnic Minorities. And Zoe Williams here, almost a veteran of the programme, I would say, a columnist for The Guardian.
That just makes me sound old.
I know, I hate being called veteran broadcaster, so I sympathise with you. I shouldn't have done it. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850, WhatsApp on the same number, the same telephone number, and you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's start off with the text question from Stephen in East Grinstead. Who will be ejected first? An asylum seeker from the UK to Rwanda or the Prime Minister from Downing Street? Zoe Williams.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the polling shifted on this ages ago, like 8 months ago. People started saying it went from kind of slightly more in favour, a hardcore against, something like 42-36. And then the polling started to shift. And what people were saying was, it doesn't matter if I agree with it or not. It's never going to happen. And they weren't saying Parliament's in deadlock. They were saying this is a stupid idea that is never going to happen. Every subsequent piece of information, I'm against it on principle, but even people who aren't against it on principle are going, £1.8 million per person. Are you having a laugh? You could process their application, retrain them at one of the finest universities in the country, and they could have a job before you'll get this done. What is the point? And so I think that's what I think definitely Rishi Sunak will be out before any single person is on a plane, but I'm hoping to never see anybody on a plane.
So you don't think, because he's saying, well, June or July, the first plane will take off, you don't think that'll happen?
Well, no,
because the courts will intervene?
Well, A, I think the courts will intervene. B, I think there's a real chance that he'll have a crisis after May, right? I don't mean Theresa May the person. I mean, everybody had a crisis after her. But after the 2nd of May, there's no guarantee that his party's going to stick with him. I mean, it'd be good to have a Tory to give their view, but would they give an honest view? I don't think they would.
Rakib.
Well, I think that in terms of the Rwanda policy, I'd consider myself to be quite conservative when it comes to refugee and asylum policy. I think that we have a very serious problem when it comes to the small boats emergency on the English South Coast. I think that male-dominant irregular migration has overburdened our asylum system, and women and children, women and girls at serious risk of sexual violence in their homelands are being left by the wayside. But saying that, I don't think that the Rwanda, it's called the UK-Rwanda Migration Partnership, I don't think that holds the answers at all. as Zoe's mentioned, there's a very high risk of judicial intervention in any case. So it's a question of whether is there more chance of asylum seeker being sent to Rwanda or Rishi Sunak being ejected from number 10. I think that the latter is far more likely. And as Zoe's also mentioned, that the local elections could be a very brutal experience for the Conservatives, and that there will be a lot of clamour and a lot of talk about actually removing Sunak from his leadership position.
And Munira and I will be on our election night programme on the 2nd of May discussing just that for quite a bit of the evening, I suspect. Munira, do you think the government have dug themselves a hole here which they just can't get out of, or that they're just so determined to press ahead because it would be humiliating if they didn't?
Well, I do think that Rishi Sunak is hell-bent on pressing ahead, whatever the price tag is, and whatever bridges he has to burn along the way. To the original question, I very much hope the PM will be out of Downing Street well before any flights take off to Rwanda, and I suspect the vast majority of the people out there in the country want the same as well. I mean, we have spent an eye-watering £241 million on this scheme. To put that into context for your listeners, that's 5.7 million GP appointments or 95 million free school meals, something that I campaign on week in, week out. This is obscene, and it is a really strong example of how this government is just operating policy by press release. And now it has, as you say, Ian, dug itself into a hole where it's saying, it's hell-bent on trying to make sure it rams this policy through. I think the theatrics from Sunak today and making us all sit here until the early hours of the morning is largely about the fact that you've got the local elections we've just touched on coming down the tracks next week, and he's staring down the barrel with some horrendous results, and he wants to show he's doing something. But he said back in December this was an emergency piece of legislation. If he thought it was so urgent and it was going to be so effective, then he would have made us sit later, far sooner, and in Christmas and Easter recesses. The fact that we are here tonight is all about politics next week. This is an unworkable, immoral solution that is going to have zero impact, but I suspect if he possibly can, and he hasn't been ejected by his party or the country, he will try and get a few people on a plane at some point, whatever the cost.
Do you think in the end this is all about Reform UK, that he can't afford to give a signal to the right that he's going weak in any way, so he's got to plough ahead with this?
I mean, I think there's an element of that. There are two things going on. One is that they managed to persuade themselves that this was not just the litmus test of them as a kind of tough party that could see off reform as well as see off Labour, but also they persuaded themselves that this was kind of the ultimate test of their competence as a government, which you can kind of see what the problem is, right? Because they haven't got much to show for their competence, but they made a real mistake hanging this as the one thing that would badge it, because it's the most difficult thing they could possibly do. So they were just basically trying to do a number of things in one shot. They were trying to see off Richard Tice for Reform UK. They were trying to prove that they were competent, and they were trying to create some kind of coherent policy on one of Rishi's 5 pledges, which was stop the small boats. Now, even if Rwanda worked, it wouldn't stop the small boats, because deterrence doesn't work like that. Deterrence doesn't work with kind of illegal migration anyway.
Well, it does.
It really doesn't.
If 50% of the people that were coming across the channel were going to be sent to Rwanda, you could say that was a deterrent.
Well, no, but you could say it operated in your head as a deterrent, but it is proven, it is absolutely proven time and time again that when people are making that incredibly difficult, treacherous, dangerous decision, they do not think, hang on a second, I'm just going to check how Rishi's doing with his policy that isn't working. They just don't do it. They're in a kind of existential situation. So that was a mistake.
But the ones who aren't in an existential situation probably then wouldn't do it, would they? Because
the thing is, I think you're kind of constructing this not very needy asylum seeker in your head who gets on a really dangerous small boat, but isn't in any kind of peril.
Let's remember, 75% of them do get asylum when they apply, but 25% don't. And of those 25%, many of those will be economic migrants, not asylum seekers.
Well, no, but come on.
So those people, I suspect, might not make that journey.
I don't actually think. The thing is, your figures are very out of date because the backlogs are so huge. You're in a kind of permanent backlog situation with Home Office figures. So the number who are getting through on that 75%, 25% is kind of yesterday's news. news. We're just not getting the numbers through to be able to tell who is
Well, let's
legitimate
assume
and who
that it's
isn't.
roughly the same. I don't see why it should be any different.
How do we assume that, though?
Well,
The point
why
is,
wouldn't it be?
well, look, it's extremely dangerous. Getting on a small boat run by a people smuggler who doesn't care whether you live or die, it's extremely dangerous. So the idea that anybody's doing it because they think they're going to get £13.60 an hour instead of £11.20 wherever they come from, I think is fanciful. And I also think it's fanciful
it's not,
the
is
idea
it?
that you're kind of looking at Tory
we know
policy.
that many Albanians came along that route, and they were economic migrants, not asylum seekers, and that's been stopped now.
Well, I mean, come on, you're situating a huge amount with that Albanian contingent, which was never very large.
It was like 30 or 40,000.
It was not
over a period of 2 or 3 years. It absolutely was. And the government came to an agreement with the government of Albania, and that's more or less been stopped.
Well, no, absolutely, the government came to an agreement with the government of Albania, but that was not the small boat crossings that they're talking about, or certainly
Yes,
it wasn't
was.
a huge proportion
Absolutely.
of it. Come on, you're having a laugh. You know that it's actually it's extremely rare for people to go for kind of money reasons. They take other routes. There was a lot of migration through other routes, but that kind of what Rishi's talking about, which is the kind of, the arrivals on the Kent coast, which people got irritated about, mainly due to his rhetoric,
It was either last year or the year before. About 30 to 40% of all of the small boat crossings were from people from Albania. I think it was the year before last.
I don't know if you're right. Because a minute ago it was 30 to 40,000, and now it's 30 to 40%.
Somebody will check it out and tell us, Iain, stop going on about Albania, says somebody. Well, I'm only going on about it because it's the one bit where the government actually have a bit of success here, where they did stop them, Rakib.
No, I'd make the point that Albania hasn't experienced conflict since the 1997 Civil War, and I think this is the point we have to make, that if we want an alternative to the UK-Rwanda migration partnership, we have to accept that a decent proportion of those who are crossing on small boats, in my view, would be considered economic migrants. Now, the argument here is that are the world's most persecuted peoples, very most persecuted peoples, being accepted asylum under the current UK asylum system? I would say no.
Well, yeah, nobody's getting through, right? Because and that's a fundamental question of competence before you get to anything else.
Competence, but we also have to have a very clear system in terms of how we prioritise those who are actually very much most at risk of violence and persecution in their homelands. And at the moment, our asylum system simply does not do that.
But look, there is a huge number of people who are at extreme risk. It's not like there's a shortage. It's not like we're absolutely flooded with people who are at very low risk, and then every now and then you have to smoke out the person who's at high risk. There is a huge amount of need for asylum. So before you get to...
I agree with that, Zoe, but what I'm saying is that the people who are most at risk of violence and persecution, they are not being prioritised at the moment by our asylum system.
prioritised. I mean,
because the backlog is 128,000, and actually, if you spent the money that's been spent on the Rwanda scheme on Home Office caseworkers, you could probably get about 6,000 of them, which would help clear some of this backlog.
They've already been doing that. I mean, it was 170,000.
But we all found out that Rishi had skewed the numbers to suit his story. But just to go back to your point, actually, Iain made the point that 3 out of 4 of those coming in small boats are able to successfully claim refugee status. They are coming from places like Afghanistan and Eritrea and Sudan, which is why we've continued to argue for safe and legal routes. And it's a myth that there are many safe and legal routes. That's what the government says. And actually, for those, the 25% who aren't eligible to be here, the biggest deterrent would be actually knowing that their claim is going to be processed quickly and efficiently, and they're going to be deported back to their country of origin if they can't stay. Last year, I had somebody in my surgery who is an asylum seeker who's been waiting for his application to be processed for 8 years. I kid you not, 8 years.
No, I'm aware of those cases.
It's ridiculous. So if we actually had a functioning system, that, I think, is probably one of the strongest deterrents, rather than this ridiculous bill. And one of the things we're arguing over tonight, I thought my colleague Tim Farron made a brilliant point in the House of Commons this evening. He said, look, if Rwanda's a safe place, why on earth is that going to be a deterrent to all these people coming over? And if it's not a safe place, then you're wrong to want to send people there, and that's an immoral thing for the government to do.
Just on the Albanian point, according to the Migration Observatory, a small number of nationalities make up a large share of people crossing the channel in small boats. From 2018 to March 2023, 71% of total arrivals, that's 62,513, had one of 5 nationalities. Iranian, 21%, Albanian, 15%, Iraqi, 15%, Afghan, 13%, or Syrian, 7%.
Yeah, but Ian, look, first you said 30 to 40,000. There's only 60,000 people there over 5 years. Then you said 30 to 40% of them were Albanian, and there only 15% of them were Albanian.
Over a course of a year.
Way more right than you are.
No, you're not. Can you not read? 15% were from Albania over 5 years, and I said 30% over 2. I'm right and you're wrong.
No, you said 30 to 40,000 people over 2 years.
I said 30 to 40%.
And that's 60,000 people in total over 5 years. You should say sorry.
Fine chance.
There is no chance. If I'm wrong, I always admit it, but I'm not in this case. You were trying to pretend that no Albanians were coming across in small boats.
You were trying to pretend that 40,000 had come in 2 years, and there's nothing like that amount.
No, there was 1 year where over 45,000 people had crossed the English Channel via small boats.
Are you sure, though? Because
I'm absolutely sure.
No, but those figures just said 2018 to 2023.
Not Albanians, that was overall for that 1 year.
62,000 people in total. Over 5 years, so it's impossible.
I'm just reading out what was in front of me. But
but the Migration Observatory is actually a legitimate
given that there were
research
44,000 in 2023.
Now, how are you getting that? If there were 62,000 from 2018,
well, that's the figure that everyone's quoting.
Listen, just because everybody's quoting it, you just read out the Migration Observatory figure. You
think you're right? I know I'm right. Shall we leave it at that?
And a very quick point, just to make a very quick point, those numbers there is very male dominant. So I do think we need to have a very serious debate about how our asylum system can prioritise women and girls in particular at risk of sexual violence in their countries of origin.
Well, yeah, no, I'm all for safe routes. That's fine.
Oh, well, let's end on that note of agreement, shall we? It's 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
17 minutes past 8. We have a small but perfectly formed panel tonight. Zoe Williams is columnist for The Guardian, Dr. Rakib Ehsan, social policy analyst, and Munira Wilson, Liberal Democrat MP and the party's education spokesperson. Right, Hassan is in Cambridge. Hello, Hassan. What would you like to ask?
Hello, hi. Should the Met Police chief resign on the Gideon Falter issue, or is this political activist creating an issue out of a small altercation with the police?
Now, the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism's chief executive, Gideon Falter, has shared a video of a police sergeant telling him he could not walk across a pro-Palestinian march because he was, quotes, openly Jewish. However, a longer version of the video clip has appeared showing the officer offering to escort him away and telling Mr. Falter that his motives for wanting to cross the road were disingenuous. Rishi Sunak has said today he does have confidence in Samark, but he needs to build the trust in the police from the Jewish community and the wider public. And Gideon Falter has also called for Samark Rowley to fall on his sword. Munira Wilson, what do you make of all of this?
So to answer the question directly, should he resign? My answer would be no. But let's be crystal clear. The language that was used by the officer to describe Gideon Falter was unacceptable, and I don't think police officers or anyone should be necessarily describing somebody in that situation by how they look or the faith background they are from, in the same way that I would take great offence and exception if someone said to me, "Oh, well, you're Asian, you're brown, you're an ethnic minority."
I thought you would say, obviously, a Liberal Democrat.
Oh, yeah.
Given that you're wearing yellow.
Openly Liberal Democrat.
I was told this was SNP yellow earlier today by a Labour member, but there we go. But, if I happened to be in central London, there was a National Front march and a police officer said to me, "Oh, well, given the colour of your skin, you really shouldn't be here," I would find that incredibly offensive. So I think Sir Mark was right to apologise. I think it's important that he's met with leaders of the Jewish community. But I think we also need to recognise, especially having seen the longer full video clip, and I talk to local police officers in my own constituency about this all the time, because being a London MP, many local police officers from my patch are extracted from the area to go and help police these demos every week, that they are working in incredibly difficult circumstances. And the video shows that Mr. Folter was offered the police escort to get to where he wanted to go. That doesn't justify the language that was used, but I think we need to accept that these officers are working in extremely difficult circumstances. They need proper training and the proper resources to be able to do so in a sensitive way.
Rakib.
Well, they operate under incredibly challenging circumstances, but that's ultimately their job as well. I think that the Met, in terms of the protests, have managed them very badly. I think that while I completely support the pro-Palestine protests in terms of arguing for Palestinian statehood, right to self-determination, Palestinian national sovereignty, those causes, there have been cases of anti-Semitic chanting and also the displaying of pro-terror paraphernalia, and the police law and order response has been quite weak in many of those cases. So I think that in terms of Gideon Folter, I think the police officer was in the wrong. We're a land of considerable religious freedom, and that's something I take great pride in. So if someone wants to be openly Jewish, openly Muslim, openly Hindu, as long as that's not doing serious harm to anyone else, then so be it. That's a freedom of religious expression. But I don't like people using that incident and weaponising it to call for the banning of those pro-Palestine protests, because I think that people have the right to protest as long as they're doing so legitimately within the boundaries of UK law, and that would be a fundamental assault on freedom of assembly, and I care about that as well in the British context.
Sorry?
I mean, obviously, he shouldn't have called him openly Jewish. I mean, it's ridiculous. You can't say... I mean, the inference is that it's something you would regularly hide. So I think the apology was probably too slow and too weak, for sure. Nevertheless, the guy, if you watch the longer video, the guy would have been arrested if he'd been a pro-Palestinian marcher. He was getting into an altercation with an officer, with a camera crew. For sure, if he'd been like XR or team put a Mohican on Churchill's head, he would have been arrested. So there is a certain amount of there's something going on here, which is a kind of like a deliberate kind of provocation of the police to get to a point where you can say the streets are being made safer for the marchers than they are for me. And I think
he has got a point there, because I think a lot of Jewish people feel like this, who want to go about their business on a Saturday afternoon in central London and are effectively prevented from doing so because they are scared stiff of the consequences.
Yeah, but listen, I mean, a lot of
well, no,
Jewish
don't just
people,
dismiss it like that.
A lot of Jewish people are on the Palestinian marches.
That's true.
And a lot. I mean, I know so many Jewish people who are on Palestinian marches, who are occupying university halls, who say, I feel unsafe as a Jewish person because I'm expected to fall in with one version of belief, when actually there is no one single attitude of all Jewish people, and there's no one single attitude of all Jewish Londoners.
Gideon Folter's problem is that he should quit while he's ahead, because he was ahead.
He was ahead when
now he keeps going on. I mean, demanding the resignation of the Metropolitan Police Commissioner over this is completely facile. Is the Metropolitan Police Commissioner supposed to be responsible for every single injudicious remark that a policeman or policewoman makes during the course of their duty? Of course he isn't.
On that point as well, I think it would have been been much, much better if people hadn't, out of curiosity, gone to watch the whole video. Because if you just see the tiny snippet, you think that's outrageous. Why can't he just walk across the road? This is completely. This isn't the London I want to live in. And then when you see the whole video, he's obviously trying to have an argument with a policeman. I mean, I don't know if you've tried to do that ever in your life, but none of us do that. Whatever we're marching against, it's a really dumb idea.
I remember many years ago, a Tory MP that I knew had spoken out against his own party and was touring all of the TV studios. And he had a good case and he was making it quite well. But there comes a point when you do that sort of thing that if you do it too much, and I just remember texting him and saying, enough already. You've made your point. You're actually going to lose the argument if you do within the party, if you do much more of this. And I think Gideon Falter would be well advised to take that advice.
Agreed.
Shall we move on to James in Chelsea? James, what would you like to ask?
Is it acceptable that Thames Water is trying to raise people's bills by 44%, given their mismanagement over 20 years, 30 years? Is it acceptable? Because I don't think it is.
Right, let's repeat the question because it's a bit of a dodgy line. Is it acceptable that Thames Water is attempting to raise customers' bills by 44% given its own mismanagement over the past 30 years? Now, the background to this is that Thames Water has asked the water regulator, Ofwat, to raise bills by 44% over the next 5 years. It's also promising to spend £19.8 billion on environmental measures in that time. The company has debts of £15.4 billion, and some reports have suggested the government is considering effectively nationalising it. Zoe?
Look, I mean, almost nothing any water company does is acceptable, right?
Provide water.
No, listen, the entire policy, ever since this has been privatised, has been to load the company with debt, use that debt to pay shareholders. The debt stays on the public's books. The shareholders make a huge amount of money. The public utility is not invested in. We're still using Victorian plumbing, which is completely inadequate to the country we're living in.
You undermine your case by exaggerating it because
you can talk.
No. In the first 10 years of privatisation, there was a huge amount of investment in infrastructure. But you're right.
When was that, though, Grandad? I mean, you're really going back a bit.
The first 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's a long time ago.
1990 to 2000. And then what happened was that some of the water companies, including Thames Water, were bought by rapacious foreign investors. And that's when the problem started with increasing the debt. You've got to give the context.
But listen,
it's not all one way.
Are you seriously saying, though, that privatisation was good, actually, until some private companies behaved the way private companies do?
Yes, I am.
And started skimming it for profit.
Exactly what I'm
and
saying.
Not investing in it for the people.
Because weak regulation allowed them to do it.
Okay, well, fine. So you're a Fabian and you think everything would have been fine with better regulation. You've never seen a bit of regulation you didn't want to add to. And I really...
I'll have you know, I've just become a regulator, but I'll tell you about that in the break.
You know, the fact is, no water companies are being run in the interests of British people. The resource has been completely privatised. A small number of shareholders are walked off with a huge amount of money for literally no effort. We're all dealing with effluent in the water and sky-high bills and no investment in the service. It would be fascinating to find somebody who thought this was good. Let me break it to you that there was effluent in the water when water was under government ownership. Well, that was actually before the EU Clean Breaches regulations.
No,
I bet you missed those days, right?
No, I really don't. There has been effluent in the water on an ongoing basis. The only reason we know about the amount of effluent in the water now is because the government brought in the ways to measure it about, 7 or 8 years ago, something like that. So
you can't seriously. This can't be your case that you're happy about.
I'm not making a case. I'm trying to provide some facts to illuminate your argument.
You're happy about it because it's always been that way.
I'm not happy about anything.
I mean,
but I'm not happy about the fact that there is effluent in the water.
You're not happy about anything.
All I'm trying to point out is that it was there long before the Tories came to power.
I never said anything about Tories, did I?
No,
I'm talking about privatisation as a prelude to saying the almost inevitable result of the chaos we're in is that they'll have to be taken back into into public
hands.
hands. And then we'll be saddled with £15 billion worth of debt for a completely inadequate ground down system that we all need, we all have to pay through the nose for, and some already rich people have got very rich on.
Rakib.
No, for me, I think agree with Zoe in that the water companies all too often just simply do not operate in the wider interests of the British public. I was born in 1990, but looking at
Making us all looking at the history. We hate you already.
but generally, the core rationale for privatisation is that ultimately it delivers greater efficiency and lower costs. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened in the water industry at all, by the looks of it.
I don't think it was ever going to provide lower costs, because the whole reason for privatising
That was the whole point.
that was the whole point of privatising.
Introducing competitiveness, private sector competitiveness would help over time keep the prices
among water companies.
But in terms of helping to keep those prices at a sensible level for British people, and that simply hasn't happened.
If you're going to privatise what is effectively a monopoly, you've got to do it in a way that the customer somehow benefits from, and that is done by regulating properly, and they haven't done that.
So your argument is ultimately we don't have enough robust regulations of what needs greater teeth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which does make you a Fabian, I'm afraid.
No, it doesn't.
Really
it makes me sensible.
Listen, what's the point, Captain Sensible? What's the point of having a privatised system if you don't get the benefit of monopoly of competition? What is the point of your market if it isn't a market?
Because
what is the point of a privatised monopoly?
The whole point of it was to get extra investment from the private sector, because the government was never going to provide enough investment.
And isn't it weird how that worked? That all they did was load it with debt and then run away with the money.
It did work for a time, and it isn't working now.
And
that's
blown.
The fault of regulation. Well, that can't be an unusual thing for you, Zoe. Munira?
Well, as a London MP, my constituents would have to pay these ridiculous water bills that they're proposing. I think it's utterly outrageous, and my constituents and the millions of Thames Water customers shouldn't have to foot the bill for their failures. I mean, as you've said, they have been able, as a private company, to borrow lots of money, so they're leveraged to the hilt now. But what have they done with that money over the last goodness knows how many years? They have failed to invest in the infrastructure. Instead, they've paid out huge bonuses to their executives and dividends to their shareholders. And instead, we've got a quarter of our water leaking out of our pipes every day, as well as billions of litres, and I'm not exaggerating, it is billions of litres of sewage.
We're out of the EU now, it's gallons.
Well, I'm young enough to have been brought up on the decimal system, if I'm going to go back to the whole age.
Can I just say, I'm having to compensate for the fact that we haven't got a Tory peer here, so excuse me for intervening a little bit more than I otherwise might.
Go back to my point. And then
maybe they'll make me a Tory peer after this.
Yeah. Finish my point. Yeah.
Yes. Carry on.
And at the same time, they are wasting millions of pounds on white elephant projects, like one in my constituency, where they want to, in times of drought, take water out of the Thames, replace it with treated effluent, which is going to destroy both the natural environment in terms of our parks, as well as potential threat to the water in the river. So that's why my colleague Sarah Oldney today actually has presented a bill in Parliament to say we need to use the legislation that's already available, that actually government passed not that long ago, to take Thames Water into a special administration regime, which is not nationalisation, because the government wouldn't then be responsible for the debts. It essentially takes it out of its parent company and is under sort of government stewardship until such time as a new owner can be found. And in the long term, Liberal Democrats have argued that all our water companies need to be made into public benefit companies, which is a concept from the US, where you're actually running the company in the interests of both the customers and in the interests of the environment, and the board is reflected to do so.
Are we all finished?
Never.
Excellent. Right, we'll move on to another subject in just a couple of minutes' time. It's 8:33 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines from Daryl Jackson.
The government's Rwanda asylum bill is back in the House of Lords this evening after MPs rejected the amendments made by peers last week. The Prime Minister says Parliament could be sitting late into the night to get the legislation passed. A parliamentary researcher is one of two men charged with spying for China. They're accused under the Official Secrets Act of passing information to an enemy state. And Donald Trump's called his historic hush money trial a sad, sad day for America. He denies falsifying business records to cover up a payment to an adult film star. LBC weather, light rain continuing in central and eastern England tonight. Cold in the north with a low of 1 degree.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:36. Munira Wilson, Lib Dem MP, is here. Dr. Rakib Ehsan, social policy analyst, and Zoe Williams, columnist for The Guardian. Now, this is an interesting one. In fact, it's going to be the subject of our 9 o'clock phone-in. Text question from Phil. Is the St. George's Cross a racist emblem? Of course, it's St. George's Day tomorrow. And Sir Keir Starmer is urging all Labour candidates to celebrate it, including Emily Thornberry, believe it or not.
That's such a wonky political joke.
It was political satire. That's
all of you.
And the fact that I laughed, yeah.
Now, a new poll, listen to this, finds that 1 in 8 Labour voters think the flag is racist and shouldn't be flown. 1 in 12 Lib Dems agree, and for the Tories, it's just 1 in 100. What are we to make of that, Munira Wilson?
Well, I'm not quite sure what to make of the numbers, but to answer Phil's question, I don't think St George's Cross is a racist emblem, and I was at a St George's Day parade in my constituency just yesterday. Actually, it's in my area, Whitton High Street, and my children were part of the parade for the first time, so I was there as a proud mummy taking photos and videos of them as they were parading with Whitton Wanderers, a local football team that they play football with every weekend.
Whitton Wanderers?
Yes.
It's like my village team is called Ashton Villa.
That's a good name. I like it. And so there were loads of St George's flags, and we have a St George painted on the crossing, actually, on Whitton High Street, because we love to celebrate St George's Day. I don't have a problem with it, and if I could even be bothered when I'm watching the England matches over the summer during the Euros, I'm more than happy to drape myself in an England flag when I'm behaving as some of my family members called me a hooligan cheering England on.
Oh, let's have a sort of Gogglebox camera on your walls for that. Rakib.
Well, Being a Lutonian, I've seen how the far right tries to hijack the St George's flag, and perhaps that's feeding into some of those figures there. But I just think that if there's progressive liberals or liberal leftists who feel that the St George's flag is racist, then they're in the wrong. What it should be more about framing. Perhaps I've heard that Sir Keir Starmer's talked about progressive patriotism. He should talk a little bit more about that and flesh out what he actually means. But I think that it's a matter of the liberal left, in a sense, taking ownership of the St George's flag. Win it back. If you feel that the far right have tried to hijack it in the past, then perhaps cultivate a progressive patriotism which is fitting and many English people can buy into.
Sorry?
I mean, look, I think we can go another level here, guys. Everybody knows that flags mean something when some people use them and not something else when somebody else uses them. It's just a thing, so Liz Truss can drape herself in the Union Jack, and it doesn't mean I'm going to do anything, I'm going to do a great thing for the country. It means I'm performing a certain degree of patriotism, which is now required from my opponents, so that I can create divisions between them about how patriotic they are and how patriotic they're prepared to pretend to be.
But all politicians are doing that, aren't they?
Well, that's been a post-Brexit thing, but nobody used to do that. Like in the 90s, noughties, 10s, nobody used to have like an actual flag in their office that was twice as tall as them. Everybody would have laughed. They would have said, this is stupid. So
I'm actually embarrassed that we don't have one behind us here.
I wouldn't come on, not because I would think you were racist, because I would think it was dumb.
You've got red, white and blue in your logo.
It's like it's not. It genuinely isn't. Unless it's for 5-year-olds, a statement of how much you care for your nation. It's a statement of what you want to ally yourself with and against whom you want to range yourself. And that has been a real feature of kind of flag and heraldry discussion ever since Brexit, frankly. And before that, even before that, what you referenced with Emily Thornberry.
I mean, if you think about... the flag of St George was the emblem for far-right racists back in the 70s and 80s. And then Euro 96 came along and everyone was flying it. And that was what I think reclaimed it. And over the last, how long's that ago? 30 years nearly. Since then, it's become a completely acceptable thing for people to fly.
It reclaimed it for you. Other people still look at it. Maybe people a bit older than you still look at it and think of the BNP. Other people still will think...
Like you.
Well, no, I'm not older than you. How dare you? Other people still will look at it and think, I no longer associate it with the National Front, but I don't want it shoved down my face, shoved down my throat, what I should be waving and what I shouldn't. Other people still will think this is actually a far-right ethno-nationalist manoeuvre from a newly radicalised Conservative Party. Lots of people think different things, and that is completely legitimate.
Do we have to differentiate, though, between the flag of St George and the Union Jack?
I mean, you can if you want to. I'm not fussed.
I'm just asking the question.
Look,
because I don't think the Union Jack does have quite the same connotations.
Well, the Union Jack has connotations of kind of soft. No, not soft. It's got connotations of a certain kind of politics. But you're right, not necessarily. I mean, the Union Jack is more of a reform thing, and the St George's Cross is more of a BNP thing, right? So I think that both of those parties are racist parties, but you could argue that you could split the difference about which ones.
So why is Keir Starmer urging his candidates to celebrate St George's Day?
Frankly, I think he's scared of his own shadow. He thinks if he doesn't do that, then the Daily Mail will call him a threat to security. I think he should have a little bit more respect for the left of the party rather than just dancing to the tune of tabloids.
But why should the left be less patriotic than the right?
But it's not that we're less patriotic, it's just we're less mindless. We think for ourselves.
No, but there's much to be proud of in England, though.
But
you can even say that from a liberal left perspective. For example, just saying from my perspective, I think that looking at it from an ethnic and religious minority perspective, there's no other country I'd rather live in being a member of a racial, ethnic and religious minority. I think that we're a land of some of the most robust...
Just define your minorities.
So I'm a Bangladeshi Muslim heritage. And I think that if you look at anti-discrimination protections on the grounds of race, ethnicity and religion, England far outperforms other countries such as France, Germany and the Netherlands.
But listen,
I'm just making the point that there is much reason to be... And we're a land of considerable religious freedom as well.
The point we would make, Zoe probably would make and I would make, is you can be very, very proud of your country, but you don't have to fly a flag.
It's a nice flag.
I don't have a problem with people who do
it is the national flag. It is the national flag,
with people who do wish to. I'm a liberal. Everyone's entitled to do that.
As soon as
don't think.
One at a time.
I think what Zoe's saying is that I think a lot of politicians are just trying to be performative with the flag flying.
Most politicians are performative in most areas of public policy. This is the reality of it.
It's important for the civilization we live in and the Britain that we love that nobody tells us what to wave, right?
You don't have to wave it.
That is a fundamental principle of being a citizen of this country, or a subject, which you'll probably correct me to, is that no Tory can tell me what flag to wave, how much to love the flag, whether I should love it at all, or where I should put it.
I wouldn't dream of doing so, because I think it is an individual thing. I don't actually
think of you as a Tory anymore.
But one thing Sir Keir Starmer knows is that you see recent by-elections where they won places like Tamworth in Staffordshire and Wellingborough in Northamptonshire. Those are people who actually have quite a strong, specifically English identity, and there's no problem with looking to build bonds with those voters who may take pride in their English identity, whether it's the English countryside, its history, its heritage and traditions. There's nothing remotely racist about that at all. It's quite inclusive more than anything.
But do you not think nowadays that people are almost encouraged to feel guilty about being patriotic?
No, this is constant right-wing shadow boxing. You create this straw man. These people are silencing me for doing this thing, and everybody's like, no, we're not. Who did that? Who hurt you? And then you come back with like another one. So like one minute you're being cancelled for not being allowed to say. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, I do think 1 in 8 Labour voters thinking that the St George's flag is racist. I think that is a problem.
No, it's not a problem.
That's far too high.
It's not a problem. No, the people who say 1 in 8 Labour voters probably is like my mum's age, and she probably would think, ugh, gosh, that reminds me of the BNP. That's completely legit. I have no problem with an 85-year-old.
How can a flag be racist?
Well, because it was.
We're not talking about the Nazi swastika here, are we? Let's be honest. It's St George's flag.
Seriously, you were born in 1990, so you might not remember, right? There was a big racist movement in the United Kingdom, and its flag was the St George's cross. That's not the point. It was big.
Well, you just said it was big, and it was. I mean, compared to other countries, we've never had a big far-right movement.
Yeah, but you remember Barking and Dagenham. You remember they were dark times.
I do remember. I was an election agent in the famous Tower Hamlets council election where the BNP got a seat.
Yes, so there we go.
I wasn't the election agent for the BNP. I just want to make that very clear.
Let's just check the records, shall we?
And there has been recent surveys, just make this point, but there have been recent surveys show that the vast majority of white English people, they don't frame Englishness in ancestral and racial terms, they frame it in more civic terms.
Yeah, no, but listen...
So I think there is an opportunity to promote civic.
I think that is a generational shift, to Zoe's point. So my late father never liked me calling myself English, even though I felt English. He always said, no, you're British, you're not English, because he associated English with being white. So I think that is very much a generational
But also, I remember a time, it wasn't even that long ago, when we could tolerate difference, right? When not everybody had to think the same thing about a flag, when not every Labour Party member had to think the same thing about what had a racist connotation and what didn't. We could tolerate the difference because that's the only way that parties stay together. I'm really sick of this kind of drive to homogeneity on both sides.
But it's a disproportionate opinion, especially in Labour circles, especially the more activist circles, that England is some kind of racist, bigoted hellscape, and that couldn't be further from the truth.
Well, some people,
I think it's very important for the Labour leadership to make that point.
Some people, that's their experience, and 1 in 8 people is not that many. It's like 12%. So 88% don't think. 88% of Labour members don't think that Britain is racist, and 12% do. I don't think that's a big deal.
Just before we move on, what you said I thought was very interesting about English-British. Do you... I mean, I consider myself English first, British second, European third. What would you...
Whenever I've been asked this question, I never put it in an order because I've always loved also being European. No, I know, but I've always really... Look, I'm a Liberal Democrat. I love the fact that I'm also European.
You're a Liberal Democrat.
I studied French and German at university. I've always been a passionate European. So I'm English. I'm British. I'm European.
In that order, great, Rakib.
No, I think for me,
not in that order. I am all of those at the same time. Iain Dale.
I'm a very strong unionist, so naturally I think I have a very strong British identity, but also take pride in being born and raised and continue to live in England.
I'm a Londoner too. That's a very important point.
Local identity
because I'm born and brought up London girl, so I am London first and foremost.
Zoe,
I'm going to go Welsh, British. I'm going to skip English. I'm going to go straight to London.
Have you ever lived in Wales?
No, no, but like it's completely unbroken.
Tell us about Owen Glendower.
No, I can't. That is outside my own
Welsh identity.
Hey, listen, one of your listeners has said the correct.
No, you're
thing.
not supposed to read out text from the screen.
No, but I just noticed.
And as most of them are fairly cruel towards you.
No, one of them is cruel towards me, and one of them says that it was the Union Jack that the BNP used, not the St George's flag, which is true.
That is true.
Yeah.
National Front, I think, did use the flag of St George. I think, but I may be wrong. Right, we're going to move on in just a second. It's 8:48.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:51 on LBC. Text here from Jill, who says, Iain and panel, loving you all tonight. Big hugs on a great conversation and thoughtful comments. I'll leave Zoe to read out the one below that.
Well, look, I'm not going to take an insult from anybody who spells my name with a Y. I'm just not having it.
Right, let's move on to... let's move on to a bit of breaking news, because the House of Lords has pushed the government's Rwanda bill back to the Commons again as a row continues over the controversial plan to stop the boats. Is Munira happy about voting again tonight? Asks Corey.
Yes, I'll keep voting as long as the Lords keep pushing it back to us, because it's wrong and immoral, and they're trying to say black is white and white is black. It's bonkers.
Of course, when I first worked in the Commons in the 1980s, all-night sittings were just a feature. They weren't unusual. Yeah. They're really unusual nowadays, aren't they? Yeah. Right, Sandra has a text question. Will the latest Trump court case make the blindest bit of difference to his chances? Now, a poll for the Associated Press earlier this month found 50% of adults, regardless of who they usually vote for, would consider Trump unfit to be president if he's convicted of falsifying business records to cover up a hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. However, only 15% of Republicans believe he would not be fit for office if convicted. What are we to make of that, Rakib?
Well, I think that the figure for the Republicans is quite astonishing, that only 15% believe that he would not be fit for office if he was actually convicted.
But even that should rule him out. If you look at the electoral arithmetic, you think, well, if you've lost 15% of your core support, how can you win?
But I think what's keeping him in play is ultimately President Biden's mental fitness, and I think that has deteriorated significantly over the course of his presidency. But I suspect that when it comes to the presidential election, especially if he is convicted, that would put off a great number of independent voters who are not affiliated with either the Democrats or Republicans.
Sorry?
It can't be Biden's mental fitness, can it? Because Biden on the worst day on earth is not as completely meandering and nonsensical, and also a little deteriorating before your eyes as Trump is. So it must be something. It must be. I mean, I think he kind of activated something really deep in that side of the American electorate where every single time he looks under threat, it just hardens his support. I'm surprised that the number of Republicans who won't, who think him being in prison is a bar to office is as high as 15%, because he does seem to have kind of both activated a really, really radical hardcore and radicalised the ones who weren't that hardcore to begin with. So I don't know. I know Americans who think that Democrats and indeed the kind of rule of law altogether should have stalled it until after the election, because it's just helping his chances. It's just giving him this kind of martyr status, whether he wins or loses.
It's so counterintuitive, though, isn't it?
I know, it's really
I'm trying to think if the same thing happened here, where you had one of the party leaders. Well, it did nearly happen in 1979, didn't it, with Jeremy Thorpe? Though he did have the good grace to resign as Liberal leader. Sorry to bring up old sort of wounds, Munira. But it couldn't. Could it happen here, Zoe, do you think?
What? We get like a dangerous criminal who campaigns from prison.
A real populist, whether on the left or right, and they were accused of some very serious crime. I mean, he's accused of all sorts of different things, not just one. But I mean, it wouldn't be possible for someone to lead a political party or a serious political party here in those circumstances.
I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't put it past Boris Johnson. What? Why are you looking at me like that?
I wasn't. I was just looking at you. Sorry. Munira.
You're just spoiling for a fight, aren't you, Zoe? I think the poll tells you everything you need to know. I don't think it is going to necessarily make much difference to his chances. As Zoe has said, every time he gets into more trouble, it seems to harden his support. It's very counterintuitive, and I hope and pray we never see that kind of politics or that kind of figure in this country. But it is very worrying to see that more people seem to want to support him the more trouble he gets into.
I don't think that's necessarily true for independent voters in the American electorate. I think there's no doubt that he has a hard base. There's a hard base there which is deeply anti-establishment, and they believe, and in a sense that they feel that President Trump is ultimately a victim of the so-called deep state. But I don't think that's a mainstream view, and I think that if he was convicted, that would be a groundbreaking moment, and I think that would alienate a lot of independent, non-partisan voters, especially in swing states, which are very much in play at the moment, but may not be if he is convicted.
Right, we've got time for a brief question, which I'm really looking forward to your answers on, from Drew in Harlow. Does Arj Barker, who I believe is a comedian, deserve the stick he's getting for turfing a screaming child out of his show? Now, the American comedian Arj Barker has come under fire for asking a mother and her baby to leave his show at the high-profile Melbourne Comedy Festival in Australia because, he says, and this is a quote, "The baby was disrupting my performance. The mother, Trish Ferranda, says she felt humiliated." Zoe?
I mean, I mean, obviously, right? This is a non-story. Anybody,
How is it a non-story?
Well, anybody with a baby that's crying, it annoys you. You take it out. Take it out immediately. Nobody,
She didn't.
Nobody waits
So you turfed her out.
The performer to tell them off. I think it's staged so that he can just get some publicity.
Oh,
That's what I think. Come on, nobody sits with their baby crying and everybody looking at them. It just doesn't.
But they
happen.
do. Have you ever been to a wedding where there's a baby crying and the parents just sit there and think it doesn't matter?
I've never seen that happen.
I have many times.
Really?
In a funeral as well. That was even worse.
No, I literally don't believe you.
Well, you think I'm lying?
Yeah.
She knows how to get not invited again,
Parents,
doesn't
can I just point out, thankfully my kids are a bit older now, but it is actually a super stressful thing that if you're in something like that and your baby starts crying...
Don't take a child to a comedy festival.
No, well, I don't... I think comedy is slightly different to, say, a music, an orchestral, like a classical music concert.
How is it different?
Or
I don't want to have Vivaldi disturbed by a crying child.
No, but that's why, actually, one of the brilliant things that were in place when I was, certainly when I had little ones, is that there are more and more events where it is meant to be parent and baby, so that you can take a child that can
go to those then.
Exactly.
Don't go to this.
No, but hang on a sec. You're just complaining if they cry, or do you just not like the existence of a baby? Does the existence of a baby make you think, what if it cries?
It does, actually.
Somebody needs to pay your penalty.
I was known by my nieces as Uncle Herod.
I've never heard of him.
No, I've never heard of him.
No, nor have I.
I actually have heard
That doesn't really...
I also need to know more about whether he was amusing
Google is your friend.
In the act of
Maybe it was all part of the act. You're right.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think it was. Right.
Being
Very
hilarious.
disappointing answers there. Let's move on to our fun question from Francesca in Birmingham. I have high hopes for this one. A pub in South London is having to deal with thousands of Taylor Swift fans turning up because she mentions it on her new album. Where have you been prompted to make a pilgrimage to because it's linked to a celebrity somehow? And the pub in question is the Black Dog in Vauxhall, should you wish to join the Swifties there. I downloaded her album over the weekend to try to see what all the fuss was about, and I still remain ignorant of what all the fuss is about. It was dreadful. Rakib.
Graceland.
I've been there too.
I think Elvis is the greatest artist of all time. I know a lot of people are surprised when I say that.
It was horrible though, wasn't it? So tacky.
No, I'm saying that I would like to.
You'd like to go?
I've never been. How was your experience?
It's a great disappointment.
It's a great disappointment?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to go anymore. I don't want to go anymore.
See, he trusts my judgment. Why can't you, Zoe?
It's just a little bit too hard to falsify, that's all.
Go on, what's your answer to this one?
Oh, I've been everywhere. I've been to the Good Mixer because of all the indie bands who went there. I've been to that tea shop in Broadstairs where Dickens went. I've been to the railway bridge.
I'm performing in Broadstairs in July.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh mate, I'll tell you something after.
Okay.
I've been to that railway bridge where they shot 24, which is actually opposite the Black Dog. So if you're going to the Black Dog to see the Taylor Swift area, you should go to the railway bridge, and then you'll see where they blew up a car in series 10 of 24. I mean, I would go.
24.
I love 24.
So we have something in common.
It's super stressful, though.
After an hour, we found that we agree on something. Munira.
I'm going to disappoint you. I have never paid pilgrimage to anywhere because of a celebrity. I just don't do the celebrity thing. I think the nearest I can come to being able to answer this question was obviously when I went to the Taj Mahal. I tried to emulate that famous photograph of Princess Di sitting on her own.
Did you succeed?
All sad and lonely.
But people kept coming to sit beside you.
Sadly not. But I can't think of ever going out of my way to go somewhere just because a celebrity was there.
I went thousands of miles out of my way.
Where to?
I'm a huge fan. In fact, it is, I think, along with The West Wing, one of the greatest TV series ever shown, Dallas. I went to Southfork.
Oh my God.
And it was great. I stood on the balcony where JR pushed Kristen off into the swimming pool.
Oh my days.
Wow.
So was it JR that you were paying pilgrimage to, or just the whole show?
Well, in my younger days, people did think I looked a bit like Bobby. So I was probably more paying tribute to him.
Is that when you had hair, Ian?
That's two of our three guests who will never be invited back on the show. Rakib, he's coming back. 100%. He's made a very good impression.
Right. You're like this. A friend of my school friends has just bought Hayek's house in
really?
outside Totnes.
Oh no, I'd like to go there.
Yeah. Well, Well, I'll tell her to expect you.
I have been to Totnes. I could, for the love of money, I couldn't get a cream tea in Totnes. Can you believe it? I became very bad-tempered.
I just think maybe you were distracted by a baby.
Shall I tell the ladies and gentlemen what we're doing in the next hour? We're going to return to one of our questions. We're going to ask, has Sir Keir Starmer got a patriotism problem? 1 in 8 Labour voters, 1 in 12 Lib Dems and 1 in 100 Tories think that St George's Cross is racist and divisive and should not be displayed. The Tories accuse Labour of hating Britain. Dear, oh dear. Why do some people have a problem with patriotism, though? I mean, that is a serious question, because I think some people are made to feel as if they're somehow being racist by saying that they're proud of their country or proud of their flag. How have we got ourselves into that situation where, it doesn't happen, I think, in any other country apart from ours? Why is that? Happy St George's Day tomorrow. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call.